All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second half of our Thor special. Let this be your warning. There will be spoilers coming up. And so if you haven't seen the movie, stop the podcast here. Go see the movie and come back.
Already.
If you haven't already. Yes, well, obviously, if you haven't seen the movie, is what I said.
I meant if they hadn't stopped the podcast already.
All right, we're just going to stop right here. No more. And for this half, it's me, Ben, and John. Say hello,
Hey.
John.
Hey, guys.
I actually saw a movie.
Pete Lee could not join us today. He had family obligations, and I don't even know if he's seen the movie yet or not. So
He did have some interesting thoughts coming in, which you probably already heard listening to the rest of this episode. So, Thor 2, The Dark World. I don't know if that fit.
No, Dark World, I don't know.
So, I have to say, personally, I think that I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was better than the first Thor movie. They came into it interestingly. I think I noticed there's sort of an interesting antithesis to the beginning of this movie versus the first Thor movie. At the beginning of the first one, we had they introduced Thor as this, headstrong character who couldn't wait to be king. And, with his father being king, but being sort of hesitant to hand over the throne. Whereas in this one, Odin almost can't wait to give up the throne to Thor, and yet Thor is hesitant to take it.
Right.
So I thought that was an interesting 180 to things, which is, it's just illustrating the growth that has happened over the time.
Odin just wants to go and play golf.
Yeah.
He's done.
Yeah, no, I can't blame him. I will say that one of the things I found interesting with this, so they've already sort of established that these guys are not gods per se, they're just aliens from a different realm, from a different part of the galaxy. They did sort of hint at in this movie that they, are generally humanoid, obviously, and they are much more durable than your average, Earth human, but they do have a lifespan that seems to be somewhere around 5,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, unless your father takes your powers away because you've been bad.
Right. Which it was never really 100% clear how that was accomplished per se.
Yeah, I definitely agree this was better than the first one. And yes, there's the antithesis to the first movie. I think one of the things it suffers from in the beginning of the movie, though, is what a lot of times these kinds of movies suffer from. When you have not only a grand scale in the movie, you have a grand scale with the villain and what they're trying to do. So they tell this intricate backstory in the first, 10 minutes of the movie, which kind of hurt the pacing a little bit, for the overall movie, I thought. It was good. It was well done. But
yeah, it did feel a little bit like a non sequitur to the story. It felt like, because it was narrated, that backstory piece was narrated, and that made it feel a little bit out of place compared to the rest of it, but it almost had to be narrated because there wasn't really enough dialogue to carry it. And half the dialogue that there was Malekith and the other Dark Elves speaking whatever made-up language they shoved in there.
Right.
Just so we had some reading to do.
They just give them marbles and say, "Here, try to speak around these."
Yeah, and honestly, I normally I'm not the kind of person who really balks at subtitles per se. Not that I go seeking them out, but I've enjoyed my share of foreign films. But for this type of movie, I don't know if that really was the best choice on their part, because I think that, because I went to see it with my whole family, with my kids, and, my son doesn't really read well yet. My daughter might have read some of the subtitles, but probably doesn't read them that quickly to really keep up with everything that's going on. The point is the kids are part of the audience. That younger kids who aren't necessarily going to be into reading subtitles that much are part of this target audience here, and they need to. I would have thought it would make more sense to give them some sort of different accent or something, and just have them speak English. But
yeah, we talked about this a little bit the other day. Is the problem with when you give characters a made-up language or even a foreign language, but a made-up language in this case, and you have them speak it, it takes you out of the movie right away.
Yeah.
And we didn't have them speaking English at all before this. It was, here's the introduction to the Dark Elves, and they're speaking their Elvish language, and now you have to read subtitles, and you have no idea about the emotional state or the background of these characters at this point. Just read this and figure it out. And I think a movie you can compare the Dark World to in some ways is the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because they also did have some of the Elvish subtitles at points in that movie, in those set of movies.
Right.
And that bothered me a little bit there too, because again, it's unnecessary. Like, I don't really see how that helps, other than the fact that Tolkien did go to the trouble of writing these elaborate languages for these races and included that stuff so that we know that these languages exist to be and can be spoken. It doesn't mean that you have to give everyone or give a small group of people that nerdgasm of being able to hear it in the big screen. We would just as happy hearing them speak English and maybe do something to make us know that they were really speaking Elvish or whatever. I don't know. It just seemed unnecessary, especially in this, because in most of the cases where it was being spoken, it was not being spoken around other people they didn't want to understand what they were saying.
Right,
you
right.
know?
Exactly. It's they were in their ship with their other elven kind.
Exactly.
So there was no
need.
In
which case, why did it matter? It served no purpose.
Right.
So that stuff really bother you that much?
Actually, it didn't bother me that much. I just thought it was an odd choice. Is really what it came down to. That it was an odd choice, knowing the potential target audience for this movie. That said, though, my kids were there watching the movie, and not once did either of them ask for any clarification on what these guys are saying. So either they didn't care enough, or there was enough context to carry it through that they didn't need to know more than what they could gather or infer on their own.
Well, actually, the reason I brought it up was one of the criticisms around this movie was everyone really liked Loki, everyone loves Loki, and people weren't happy with Malekith and the way he was presented in the movie. And I kind of feel that's one of the reasons they didn't like him, is because they weren't drawn in emotionally because they had to read subtitles. So they had to think about him more than just feel the moment.
Well, it was your generic bad guy. I'm going to remake the entire universe in my own image, and I think the Dr. Christopher.
Feels flat.
The doctor, yeah, what?
Oh. I said that sort of depiction feels flat.
Yeah, and Dr. Christopher had so much makeup on you couldn't recognize him. So.
Yeah. And I will say that, and I agree with you, John, that whenever a character is subtitled, when you have to read that subtext, you sort of lose, especially if you're trying to pay attention to both what they're saying and what they're saying at the same time. You have to pay attention auditorily to get the context, the tone of what they're saying, but also read the subtitles to get the context of what they're saying. So it's difficult to pair those together. It takes a little bit more mental energy to do so. So I think it's a detractor to. I think you're right. I think that the Elvish language did detract from his characterization a bit, the depth of his character.
It wasn't the language though. It was the fact that we're introduced to him by
character too. I wouldn't say all was it. I just think it was part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to have known did like an Asgard, get with his sister or something, or his mom, and that's why he wants to remake the entire universe? I mean, what did somebody eat his lunch out of the lunchroom?
Well,
what made him
someone
do
wasn't
the entire universe?
Somebody wasn't paying attention to the movie.
No, yeah, because they were from a time before the light came into the universe, so they wanted to revert it back to the way that it was.
Yeah, but that's not. Well, I don't think that's the original. I mean, that's definitely not Norse mythology, and that's really not. I don't think that's in Marvel mythology either. Dark elves.
Half these characters aren't in Norse mythology.
Well, they've been generally kind of, nice to that and true to it, but
they take liberties.
But
we actually talked a bit about that in the last half. But it's I don't care about the liberties they take as far as the Norse mythology. I'm okay with that. I don't expect them to follow it closely. But I do think they do need to have the villain have a motivation that makes sense. And I guess his motivation made some level of sense, but it just did seem a little blinderish, narrow. He had tunnel vision towards a singular goal, and that doesn't feel realistic. And it just didn't. It's felt, and I guess his willingness to sacrifice, lives to get there,
like most of the rest of his race, just so that one.
Well, yeah, again, he was willing to sacrifice his own people. So, what difference does it make to sacrifice other, species and races and whatnot? So there was no, what do I want to say? There was no dichotomy there. There was no, I'm just saying that there was nothing wrong with the characterization and the fact that there was no dichotomy, there was no hypocrisy, but at the same time, it was flat.
Right. Well, I mean, from my understanding, he's a very one-dimensional villain from the comic books as well.
Yeah.
He just is an evil guy doing evil, basically.
Because he's evil.
Right, exactly. Right. Like he's bad for the sake of being bad in the comics. So,
right.
So you take a one-dimensional villain and you don't add anything to him really, other than yes, he has a motivation, but you've been fighting this war for millennium and haven't been winning. So you would think you would change your tactic at one point or another.
So far it doesn't sound like we like this movie very much the way we're talking about it.
No, it doesn't. So.
I really did like this movie a lot.
And let me get into one of the things I really liked about. We talked about in the first half. One of my issues with the Thor movies to this point has been I didn't like how they depicted the relationship with him and Jane Foster in the first one.
Right.
And they definitely did a much better job of depicting their relationship in this one, and the fact that you get the feeling, at the end that he'd rather just be on Earth with her than rule Asgard at that point. Yes, he says that he doesn't want to rule even with her by his side, but you feel that it's much more deeper. It's just he wants to be with her and that's it. He doesn't want to worry about ruling.
Right. He doesn't want that role.
Right.
Because he's afraid it'll change who he is to something else, and he likes the person he is now.
Right.
But yeah, I do, and yes, I thought that relationship was well done. I enjoyed the one thing that I thought. So the one thing we've talked about a number of times in these different types of movies is the importance of humor, which which obviously Man of Steel was not humorous. Iron Man 3 was maybe a little too much in some cases. In this movie, it's a tough line to skirt because Thor is not necessarily a funny character. I mean, he was in the Avengers, but I wouldn't have expected him to be funny in that same way in this movie, and he wasn't. But they did manage to keep a good amount of humor in the movie through other characters, and that I appreciated a lot. Between Darcy's character and things going on with her, and other accessory characters, they really managed to have a solid, enjoyable amounts of humor scattered throughout the whole movie, without making Thor seem pratfallish at all himself.
Well, let's be honest. The humor that Thor brought to the Avengers was between him and Hulk, and
well, there was some of it. There was more than that. Like I thought one of the funnier lines in that related to Thor was, when Thor was defending, talking about when he first came on the helicarrier, and they're talking about Loki, and this is my brother, and he's like,